All right. Well, welcome to the podcast today, Tristan.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I'm excited to talk about your book, um, "Why Emotions Matter," and that you wrote with your husband Jonathan, and then Melissa.
Yes, Melissa, she's a great writer. Couldn't have done it without her.
The I heard about your book from clients, and they came into session once, and they were excited about your book, and I learned why. It's a great book.
Oh, thank
It's
you.
very helpful. And so, but before we dive in to your book and how you guys wrote it, could you share a little bit about your background?
Yes. Well, I grew up in Southern California and I moved up north to go to undergrad at Multnomah. And I ended up staying there for 4 years. I planned on only going for one to just learn of the Bible, but I loved it so much I stayed. And then I just at Multnomah, that's when I discovered not just my love for theology, but my love for psychology and how those overlap. And so I ended up discovering that counseling seemed like a great fit for who I'm created to be and what I'm interested in. And so I pursued that as my vocation. And I went to George Fox, and I really enjoyed what I learned at George Fox. And then right after grad school, I started working at a private counseling agency that focused on trauma and abuse recovery. And
Mm,
I worked there for a couple years and then started a private practice in 2008. And I've been in private practice since then. And now I'm just transitioning to doing a little bit more coaching um, than therapy. And but I really enjoy both.
mm. Neat. So the we have that in common where I started at Multnomah myself for a year. I moved up from Southern California,
Oh
and I
wow.
thought I was going to be up here for a year, and then
Yes. I
uh
heard that's a common story at Multnomah.
yeah, and I did not know the common story is that like you meet your spouse there at Bible college, and
Yes.
but that happened for us, and uh, and then uh, did not know I was going to be a counselor or have an interest in counseling until I took some of the counseling courses. Um, and
Yes, that's what
yeah,
happened to me too.
yeah. It's and one of the things that I really love about your book, if find helpful, is how you integrate theology and psychology. Um, so how w- can you share the story of how the book came into being?
Yes. Let's see. So I think really it started because of the work that I was doing with clients on processing past trauma. And a lot of the uh, research and books that I read and trainings that I was a part of, there was this common thread saying that being able to identify what you feel. So affect identification would be the technical term, and affect regulation, being able to manage those feelings and body sensations. That um, that's a key part of healing from trauma. And so I noticed that. And as I was also doing more classes and reading about emotional intelligence, I noticed that thread was the same thread that I heard through um, just the information on emotional intelligence, that people with higher emotional intelligence are the people who can identify what they feel and know how to deal with those feelings in a productive way. And
Mm,
so, what was really fascinating to me is that the same skills can help you to heal from trauma as well as enhance your life. And that emotional intelligence is shown to be a main factor in people's vocational success, relational success. And so, I think that's really what sparked it for me is I really want to help people to see the value of identifying your feelings and knowing how to manage those feelings and with wisdom. And um, my husband is his special skills is explaining things, and especially complicated things in a more succinct way. And
Mhm.
so um, there was that aspect of us partnering together. And then there was also just the personal interest that my husband and I are very different. Um, this is a book that would have benefited us when we were just
Mhm.
married, because he is a thinker on the Myers-Briggs and I'm a feeler on the Myers-Briggs. And
Mhm.
so we just had completely opposite personality takes on how to express your emotions and the value of emotions. And so, yeah, both of us had to kind of learn um, how to deal with our emotions in a more productive way, and especially in our relationship.
Yeah. And that's one of the best parts, I think, of your book is how honest you guys are. So you each, besides it being like a self-help book, you each share little vignettes of your perspective and how
Mhm,
things were for you as
mhm.
you're learning how to communicate and resolve conflict together. And one of the dynamics that I work with as a couples counselor a lot is where uh, one spouse is more uh, scientific or
Mhm,
logical, um, and maybe not as in touch with their feelings.
mhm.
Um, and for some reason, they partner with someone who's very in touch with their feelings, maybe sometimes a little
Yes.
too much, um,
Yes.
and very expressive. And
Mhm.
so that uh, uh, when it's healthy, it's really a great balance.
Mhm.
But when maybe during conflict or misunderstanding, it can be really painful.
Definitely. Yeah, there's a saying that the thing that attracted you is the thing that repels you later in your
Mm,
marriage, right? And so I do think that marriage is an opportunity for personal growth, and that the person you marry is reflecting back to you the issues that you need to grow in.
mhm,
And I think both my husband and I would say that um, we both had some, maturing that we needed to do and are still doing in how we deal with our feelings and how we communicate with each other.
mm, yeah. If there's anyone listening, and you've gotten feedback from your partner or spouse about not being in touch with your emotions, this is a really helpful book. And the one of the principles from the book that I'd like you to say a little bit more about, Tristan, is the idea of emotions being a dashboard. Can you
Mm,
explain that a little?
yes. Um, well, I think this is really helpful for people who tend to be more on the thinker spectrum. Like, what's the value of emotions?
Right.
And so I think it's helpful to view emotions as information. And so the metaphor that I thought of was, on your car dashboard. So when you're driving, you have all these gauges and signals that give you information about your car. And they aren't necessarily good or bad. We might not, like what we see, but it's helpful to know what's happening in your car at a very quick glance. And that's what emotions can be for us,
Mm,
that it's a summary of all the different sensations and information we're taking in. And so we might say we're sad. And it's a mixture of all these body feelings of, heavy chest, or we're feeling really tearful, as well as, our experience that we had with maybe someone earlier that day. Um, so emotions, I think, are really important because when we pay attention, we can better understand what's going on in our body and around us as well in our relationships. Um, so when we ignore the information on the dashboard of our car, we actually have less control. And um, I think that uh, when people don't see the value of their emotions, they also have just less information on how to make decisions, like what kind of career would I enjoy, or is
mm,
this relationship healthy? So that information is really valuable for making a lot of our decisions. And yeah, so
It's
that's
really helpful to pay attention because it does help with like logical decision making.
yes,
Yeah,
yes. That's what
yeah,
it took my husband a while to realize, that when he wasn't listening to his emotions, it actually um, hinders you from making, you know, helpful decisions. Um, yeah.
yeah. The the other thing that uh no, I like how you explain that emotions, like knowing them is helpful, because a lot of couples, they struggle with giving empathy to each other because
Hmm.
they have a like misunderstanding that I have to feel the same thing that you're feeling
Yes.
to
Yes.
care, or
Definitely.
or have that expectation that like I want my spouse or partner to feel the same thing. If they don't feel my sadness or happiness about something, that
Mhm.
they don't care. They don't care. And like we're not connected.
Mhm.
But
Yes, emotions definitely are a way to connect and have intimacy. And I do think that a lot of people confuse feelings and behaviors, as well as feelings and thoughts,
mhm,
that they're all very separate, or they're interconnected, but they are different things. And so I can be angry and still not yell at you. Yelling would be the behavior,
mhm.
what I'm doing with that anger. And so sometimes people feel like, well, I don't want to enable your yelling, so I'm not going to affirm that you're angry.
Oh, yeah, which just
Yeah.
frustrates the other person more,
Yes. Yes.
invalidating their feelings. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
So the I like how you're explaining that emotions are something that we're experiencing in our body,
Mhm.
because I think a lot of uh, teaching in the church and maybe even in society is that um, that emotions are, are something you can choose,
Mm.
and um, that like you can choose to be oversensitive or
Mm.
um, uh, and that they're illogical or even evil, or
Yes.
sinful.
Yes, and that's where I feel like instead of seeing that our thoughts can be, you know, connected to lies that are unproductive or things that aren't true, um, or our behaviors are unkind, um, that emotions get blamed. Yeah.
Mm, yeah. The uh, if uh, if someone has trouble with um, being in touch with their emotions, maybe anger, do you have any suggestions for them?
Yes. Well, anger is has a lot of energy with it, and so a metaphor that I like to think about is anger is like fire. And that fire can be really productive, but it can also be quickly destructive.
Mm,
And so, what we do with that fire, we could either have it give us the energy to problem solve, um, or we can let it just run amok and, become really this big problem that we're not addressing, and have it end up, becoming damaging to our relationships.
mm,
So, anger, for me, it's difficult because it has a lot of energy. I do think one of the first strategies is trying to cool down, because oftentimes with all that energy, it's hard to manage it in a productive way.
mm,
So, when you notice feeling angry, um, taking time by yourself to really cool down, either go on a walk. So, since it's of the body, you're having adrenaline pumping through you. So, thinking about what are the body things that can help you to
mm,
decrease your adrenaline,
mhm,
and physical exercise is really helpful for that. And then also just taking time to think about what is it that sparked that anger. And
mm,
oftentimes, it can be layers to it. Um, and so, what were the thoughts that you were thinking? What were the assumptions that you had? And, oftentimes as well, underneath anger is hurt. or fear. And so anger is kind of that protective energy. And so it's always good to also think about, what am I trying to protect?
Yeah. The 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 hurt and the fear in the book, you mentioned that those are like the more vulnerable emotions,
Yes.
and that
Yes.
um, not just expressing anger, but also sharing those feelings vulnerably can
Yes.
help communication, and um, your partner isn't going to get defensive at the
Yes.
anger. It
Mhm.
um, but it takes practice. It's
For
hard.
sure. For
Yeah,
sure. For
yeah.
sure. Yes, I feel like with anger, um, when you're with someone who's a safe person, that's when you can kind of go to those more vulnerable feelings.
Mm,
But I've also noticed that, if someone's not a safe person, let's say that, they are physically violent, or they've sexually abused you, that anger is there to make sure you keep a safe distance,
mm,
because they might not be a safe person to get close to and to be vulnerable with. And so it does take discernment when you get that signal to say,
mm.
what do I need to do with this protective energy?
Yeah.
What is it trying to do? Is it trying to protect me from something that's at true danger?
Mhm.
Um, or is this actually hindering me from, deepening my intimacy with my partner?
Yeah. One thing that I've noticed is that folks that are like helpers, like twos, or nines on the Enneagram, they have trouble
Hmm.
with anger.
Mm,
It, uh,
interesting. Yeah.
um, whether it's they'll often like defer. It's hard to even be assertive, much less be
Hmm.
aggressive or angry. Um,
Yes.
and
Yes. Yes. So oftentimes when people have a difficult time feeling angry, I'm sure you've heard this, but that oftentimes they talk about how anger turned inward can become shame.
mm,
And so instead of using that protective energy to do something, it's kind of burning inside you, and it burns up inside you. And
mm,
so ends up hurting you, instead of being able to, address the problem that anger is trying to communicate. Like, let's say that, your boss is violating boundaries with you, that anger is supposed to, you know, spark you to action and to set boundaries and to address the problem.
mm,
But if you just internalize the anger, and you just let it kind of just dwell within you, not only is that boss going to continue to violate boundaries, but you're also just making yourself more vulnerable to shame and depression as well.
yeah, shame and depression. And you also um, talk about how bitterness can kind of take
Yes,
root with unresolved anger. Um,
definitely.
you, so i- in your book, you mention a painful chapter in your life episode with a boss. Um,
Hmm.
could you share a little bit, Tristan, about w- what you learned and or went through about like healthy boundaries and like making
Yes.
the changes that you needed to make?
Yes, definitely. Well, I would imagine that um, a lot of listeners might be able to relate to Christian leaders who disappoint them or make decisions that feel like a betrayal of, who you thought they were.
Mm,
And so for me, I had a mentor that I really looked up to, and I was in my 20s, so very idealistic, and thinking like, this person knows how to live a life of integrity and congruency in their life as
mm,
a therapist, as a dad, husband. I just kind of put this ideal on this leader, as well as that leader, I think, wanted to project that image
mm.
of perfection, and
So you
and
you put him
so
on a pedestal and he didn't mind.
Yes, I think he also wanted to be on the pedestal as well,
Mm,
um, because the image that he projected was far off from the reality.
mm,
And so when it came to light that his life wasn't congruent and that he had more deception and betrayal in his personal life, it was just very devastating
mm,
for me because, you know, I just put too much of this value of um, how I thought. Um, I guess, I guess he sort of modeled to me what I thought my life trajectory was going to look like, or
mm,
um, what the Christian life is supposed to look like, and then to have
mm,
that, you know, get um, broken, it
mm,
really set me into a place of grief. And so the season of grief was really just acknowledging. So I talk about honoring sadness, and honoring is just what I see. Honor is just acknowledging the reality, acknowledging the truth that there's all these things that I lost. Um, and that's what I think grief helps us uh, to acknowledge, is that, you know, I lost a mentor, I lost a community, I
mm.
lost this certainty that I felt about, you know, the way that I thought my life was supposed to go, or the way
Yeah,
that,
picture of the future, like
yes,
or a
people are
dream.
supposed to be. Yeah.
Mm,
And you know, and at the same time, I'm also dealing with loss. My husband and I were dealing with infertility, and so, you know, that was getting thwarted as well. Thinking, oh, I want to move forward, and moving forward is to have a family, and that wasn't happening. Um, and so there's all these things in my life that I was experiencing loss, and um, but it was a really, even though that season was very difficult and painful and very slow, I just didn't really have energy to do much. Um, I
mm,
feel like that uh, was a great season to plant more compassion and empathy in me for other people. It also broke down a lot of I- idealism, which was also, I think, illusions. So, or delusions, you could say, things that
mm,
weren't true. And so it was important that those things were broken. So then, you know, I felt like God was trying to build um, a more stronger foundation
mm,
for me and my family. And so that season was a time of rebuilding. And so sadness and grief is oftentimes seasons of acknowledging all the rubble around you and then slowly allowing God to help you to kind of rebuild a stronger foundation
mm.
um, as you move forward.
Yeah, that that's a great picture of like rebuilding brokenness. Um, things that are just scattered. Um, what was it like, Tristan, for your husband to try to support you emotionally during this
Mm.
time?
Well, yes, that's definitely a season that was very difficult because he uh, also doesn't like sadness.
Mm,
um, and that um, feelings like anger and sadness, I think he viewed as a hindrance instead of, you know, a pathway towards wholeness. And so during that time, it was really helpful that we sought marriage counseling and mentors that helped guide us through that time. And yeah, my husband really didn't understand my pain at the time. It wasn't till later. And so that was really lonely time. But it also just, again, I think gives empathy that in grief, it's a lonely season. And thankfully, you know, when you have God, that you're not alone in that pain.
mm,
And so I do feel like that was a season of really strengthening my faith. Um, and I think with John and I, that his refining season came a little bit after that,
mm,
where his parents were on the verge of getting divorced. And so what he saw as their like strong relationship was crumbled.
mm,
And his dad modeled stoicism to him. And so for him to see that his dad was starting to make all these impulsive and, unwise decisions really
Mm,
rattled him,
mm.
and he realized that he could go down that same path.
Oh, okay.
And
So
so,
his dad's like emotions and unresolved issues were like playing out, leaking
yes,
out in an
yes,
unhealthy way.
yes, definitely. And
Mm,
so, yeah, for him, it really rattled him that he always viewed his dad as this very consistent, he was a police officer, an elder
mm,
at their church. Um, he just really, uh, in his mind, showed he's just a stable, reliable person.
right.
And
He
so
he
to
looked up
the
to him like the example.
yes. And so for him to see, yeah, that his own dad was making all these impulsive, foolish decisions really rattled him.
Mm,
Um, and so, yeah, it was a really intense season because, we were still dealing with infertility. And then his parents, they ended up moving in with us as they
mm.
rebuilt their marriage. And it
Wow.
was an intense season, but a really redemptive and beautiful season when we look back on it.
Yeah.
But it was also a refining fire, I would
Oh my
say.
goodness. Well, like that just makes me think like appreciate your book more because you're distilling like really hard things um
Yes.
in
Yes.
into these lessons in a very practical way for readers.
Thank
Um,
you.
how
Yes,
how
the
did
the
you guys?
lessons.
Oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, the stories that we had, we definitely condensed, but it was a very challenging, painful time. And so the lessons that we learned from that season was birthed out of a lot of pain.
Mm, yeah. Uh, this is a little shift, but how? What was what was it like writing a book together
Mm,
with your
that
different personalities and perspectives?
yes, that it was definitely uh really fun at times and really hard at times. um so it was very refining for us as well. Um because I'm definitely more abstract random in the way that I communicate and, you know, talk about feelings. And John is more abstract sequential. And
Mm.
so he always felt like he was trying to, guide me towards being more organized in the way
Oh,
that I
so he's
communicate.
trying to help you. Like he's like trying to project manage and like
Yes.
trying to like keep
Yes.
it on track.
Yes, definitely.
Mm,
Yeah.
mhm,
Yeah, but it definitely helped having Melissa too because she um took our book further in just yeah, trying to make it more concise and easy to read.
mm, yeah. So for listeners, so the book you talk about emotions as a dashboard, and then you have a few chapters highlighting a few emotions. We talked about anger and sadness. You also have chapters on shame and fear, uh, jealousy and being happy on
Yes.
happiness and besides just the teaching and writing about those different emotions, each chapter ends with process questions but then the last part of the book is like workbook for individuals or going through the book with groups.
Yes.
Um, yeah. And so have you like led folks through the material in the book, like as a group or uh, um,
Well, I actually haven't, but the fun part is that um John's parents, they have actually led a couple of groups, support groups through the book. And
oh,
so it's been fun to hear, what they have, yeah, just gained from that time with people. And
mhm,
um, yeah, so we wrote, or I wrote the book thinking that it could be really helpful to do with people. Um, because I do think that it's through relationships and communicating these things that really facilitate more insight and change.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Do you as a couple talk about your book or share your story?
Um, so, like with each
Well,
other or?
well, like, have you like spoken at conferences or
Oh,
done videos together?
um, we haven't done videos. We've just done a few podcasts.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, but um, I mean, we're always still talking about emotions, and it's been really fun for me. Um, like I feel like John has become um, so great at just being able to listen and help me process feelings,
Mhm.
and um, yeah, it's been a gift to experience. I think the fruit of just our own personal work.
Yeah. One thing I really thought was neat in the book is he shared very clearly what it was like to um, kind of repress emotions, and so
Mm,
he describes the experience of so many men that I've worked with, or like online. There's lots of Facebook groups for
mm,
men and for dads,
uh-huh.
um, and husbands, and like he really did a great job of communicating what that's like when you're out of touch with your emotions
Mm,
stoic.
uh-huh.
Um, but as you read through the book, you can see the healing that as he
Mm,
shares, like as he's getting healing up from that and kind of freeing up his heart.
mhm.
That was really cool to see. Um,
That's great. I'll let him
yeah.
know that.
Yeah, because it's like, like that's the picture. Like, why do counseling? Like,
Mhm,
why be vulnerable?
mhm.
And so he
Yes.
he shows a real healthy picture of like, yeah, this is what it looks like, and it's better for you individually and as a couple
Mhm.
to go through it. The oh, again, I'm glad you guys wrote the book uh together.
So Vaughn, can you oh, I was wondering if you could hear me because you cut out a little bit.
Oh, we might have lost signal for a sec. Um, but want
Yeah.
to shift gears with you, Tristan. You mentioned that you're focusing on coaching also, and so
Mhm.
could we take some time to talk about that and maybe like the difference between your work as a counselor or and a trauma specialist and with like the coaching that you do?
Yeah, definitely. So, before I did coaching, I focused more on helping people process past trauma, and I would say that um, a lot of clients that I saw experienced abuse, and a lot of them had experienced sexual abuse. And so a lot of the processing that we do kind of focused on their early childhood and oftentimes just not getting their developmental needs met.
Hmm.
And so um, just taking that time to kind of, go back to childhood, see what, maybe the experience that was painful, but also just identifying, maybe what was missing. Because oftentimes in families where there are addictions or abuse, um, children's developmental needs get overlooked. And so not getting the guidance, the nurturing, and the care that you needed during certain aspects of your life. Um, and so I really, love that work. Um, and it's the type of work that's more intensive. And I think you need to have like more consistency in your schedule. And so I think for me, just realizing, with the pandemic and the ages that my kids are at, that I needed to take a break from doing that work because my schedule is a little bit more erratic. And
Mm.
so coaching is the type of coaching that I do is more focused on problems that clients are dealing with, but then we're not necessarily focusing on developmental trauma. And the coaching that I was trained in is called Wayfinder coaching. And the reason why I was really drawn to it is that it really facilitates getting to really listen to your body and your feelings and becoming attuned to that, and that helping you to make decisions in your life and to problem solve. And one of the things that I think is sort of similar to spiritual direction, where you're doing more facilitation
Mm,
versus with doing developmental trauma work. You have to be a little bit more of a guide, like um, I would say, like um, more involved in guiding clients in interventions.
mm,
So for my phase of life right now, the coaching is great, and that's helping people deal with difficult problems, um, but they're not necessarily in a stage of life where they're feeling completely overwhelmed
mm,
by their life, and just looking for more support. Um, yeah. So, anyways, I really love the coaching
mm,
process,
mhm.
and it's
Yeah.
been really fun.
So like folks that have experienced trauma or uh, it sounds like uh, their their past and is affecting uh, their relationships or their life in a more
Yes.
like acute or intense way than the
Yes.
folks that you're doing coaching with.
Yes, with coaching, it's more focused on what are your present day problems and how do you want to move forward.
Mhm, mhm,
Yeah, and that's where I felt like it was fun, because I felt like with my training as a therapist, it was definitely focused more on the past. And I
mm,
felt like, oh, well, you get to clients to places where they feel like, oh, I've addressed a lot of my past. But then I felt like, oh, well, now we're done, because I don't really know how to kind of coach you or guide you in the present and moving forward.
mm,
So
mm.
that's why I wanted to get more training and coaching.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, and it's been really fun. I
Mhm,
think that yeah, just helping people to, again, using that tool, the same tools of identifying what you feel and how to manage those feelings in a productive way, um, help you to enhance your present situation as well.
yeah. So, what are some of the types of goals that your coaching clients have?
Um, well, I would say that when I coaching clients, oftentimes it's career related
Mm,
problems,
mhm,
or or family relationship problems in the present. And so just taking time to, like, whatever problem they're dealing with that day, starting with that. And then oftentimes it's identifying um, what are the thoughts, like, behind the problems. Because
mm, mhm,
as you know, with therapy, that um, there's what acceptance and commitment therapy talks about: clean pain and dirty pain,
mm,
right? And so clean pain would be, the challenges that we're facing that are just difficult. And then dirty pain would be the thoughts that we tell ourselves that increase the suffering.
mm,
And so oftentimes with therapy, and then especially with coaching clients, it's identifying what are the thoughts that you have that are making this problem more of a problem or
mhm.
more difficult to address.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So doing that type of tool, as well as um, just taking time to listen to their body and what it's trying to communicate to
Mm,
them. Because oftentimes we're so busy that we don't really realize um, how tired we are,
mhm.
or where we even have pain in our body, and what we need.
Yeah. Tuning into that. The your chapter on sadness, in the book, I I I think it was your sister who was sharing that uh,
Yes.
just how tired she was, and um, I think that's really been a huge complaint um, uh, or problem that a lot of folks are experiencing this last year, um, just with the stress and the grief and the losses of
Yes.
missed opportunities, and having to cancel plans and cancel weddings, and things like that.
Yes,
um,
definitely.
yeah.
Yeah. So unacknowledged loss can just feel like fatigue
Mhm.
and lack of enjoyment in life.
Mm, mhm. Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. The as we wind down our time for today, Tristen, is there anything that we haven't touched on about your book that you'd like to highlight or share more about?
Um, well, one of the things in our book that I wanted to help people with is that, with the dashboard analogy, there's times when, the signals that we're getting seem really confusing.
Mm,
And so we have a chapter just on, um, you know, when when your dashboard's confusing you. And so that's often the times when people come for therapy,
mm,
right? Is that your response to a situation doesn't really match the situation. And so, like on a more intense scale, post traumatic stress disorder is, when our bodies, are in a safe place, but our bodies aren't acting like they're safe. And so we're having recurring nightmares, we're hypervigilant, and that, yeah, we just can't relax. And so
mm,
I think it's important to acknowledge that, just like with our car, I mean, I have no idea about how to deal with my car. I take it to a mechanic. That there's times when, our our emotions are just going to confuse us, and so seeking help, and that can either be, a mentor or a pastor, but ultimately, that I think therapists are trained when it comes to trauma recovery to have certain tools that are helpful for processing unresolved past trauma. So things like EMDR, the eye movement desensitization reprocessing. That's one of the tools that I'm trained in, which I've found really helpful for processing past trauma. Lifespan integration is also another great tool in somatic experiencing. And so finding a therapist who's trained in those specific trauma recovery tools can be really helpful if you're noticing that um, your feelings aren't matching the circumstance, or your response and your feelings aren't really matching the circumstance.
mm. Yeah, thank you. So the those are a few tools individually that will help if you have uh, trauma in your background. Do you have any recommendations for couples? Uh, the Whether it's resolving conflict or communication. Do you
Oh,
coach
yes.
couples?
I don't coach couples, um, but as far as tools that if you just want to enhance your connection with your partner, your spouse, one of the tools that my husband and I have found really helpful, and we've done a lot of different therapy and a lot of different types of therapy, um, but nonviolent communication. We took a class, 11-week class in it together, and I have found that it has been one of the best frameworks for helping us to identify what we feel, and then even just underneath the feelings to figure out what is the need there. And oftentimes, where John and I have conflict is the strategies that we are doing to try to meet our needs. And oftentimes, we're really unaware of what the need actually is.
Hmm.
And so, um, like one of the conflicts that we get into a lot is in the car, and
Hmm.
I had like some unresolved past trauma driving with John, where I would, very easily get jumpy.
Feel
Um,
anxious in the
yes,
car? Yeah.
due
Mm,
due to past um, car accidents that I've had.
Mm,
Um, but I did some EMDR around that, and that was really helpful.
mm,
Um, but even after processing that past trauma, um, I still, if I'm already a little anxious about something else, driving is just having someone else drive um, can also get me more anxious. And
mm,
so we'd have these conflicts over, me pointing out danger to him and then him feeling angry about that, like I'm telling him what to do.
yes.
And so so in nonviolent communication, it was helpful because it helped me to identify I have a need to feel safe and I'm not feeling safe. And John had a need to feel autonomous and independent. And so me giving him feedback about, there's a car right there, or, watch out for this. It
Mm,
was not meeting his need for independence. And so when we put those needs on the table, we were able to come up with a better strategy, which was, when I'm driving or when I'm anxious, to have me drive. And
mm,
so he can feel, independent, not having my feedback, sitting shotgun, and I can feel more safe, being able to drive
a little
at
more
the
in
speed,
control.
yeah, speed
Yeah.
that I'm comfortable and the distance that I like between cars
Hmm.
when you're stopping, those type of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, so nonviolent communication is definitely been um, life changing for us, and I
Yeah.
and I highly recommend it to a lot of other couples as
Yeah.
well.
I nonviolent communication. I think it would be really helpful for more folks to learn it and know about it. I just came across uh, a YouTube channel that on nonviolent communication. Uh,
Oh,
I,
great!
I send videos to clients sometimes, and but this was a new channel, and uh, it it it's so good and about expressing or first identifying needs and wants and then
Yes,
expressing and making requests
yes,
and not
yes.
blaming so yeah
Oh,
it's
that's
it's
great. You have
a
to
really good
pass
tool.
pass it on to me too.
Yeah, so the uh Tristan, once again, I love your book.
Oh,
I'm
thank
glad
you.
you guys wrote this because I really think it'll help lots of couples. And the for listeners, how can they learn more about you or connect with you?
Yeah. Well, I have a website, which is just my first and last name, tristancollins.com, if they want to learn more about me and what I do. And then I'm on Instagram at Tristan Collins LPC. And then our book has its own website. It's whyemotionsmatter.com. And if you sign up through the website, you can get 2 free chapters to read and see if it's a good fit for you or not. Um, and I think we have some links to podcasts that we've done interviews on. Like if you're into the Enneagram, I think there's a link where we talk about our Enneagram numbers and how that plays out in our marriage.
Oh, fun.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. The I don't think you shared. What are your Enneagram numbers?
So I'm a self-preservation 2, and my husband is a social 5.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Listeners, uh, I encourage you to order the book. You don't need to read the first 2 chapters. Just get the book. What works better? Ordering the book from your website or other book distributors like
Oh, that's sweet.
Amazon?
It's yeah, our book is through Amazon, so
Okay,
um, yeah, either is great.
great. All right. Thank you, Tristan, once again for being a guest on the
Oh,
podcast.
thanks for having
I
me.
really appreciate it.